Welcome everybody, one and all out there in podcast land, to episode number 9 of Different Strings, a guitar adjacent podcast with Wes, that's me, and Andrew.
Hi everyone. Hi Wes.
This is episode number 9. Did I say that already? It doesn't matter. And we're calling this episode, you gotta do me a favor and drop in some reverb on this if you can. Pedalboards of Doom. And what we're going to do, we're going to look at pedal boards. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things. We may mention some specific pedals, but most of that we're going to do on a future episode. But we got to talking, we were thinking about especially people who need to cover a wide variety of sonic landscapes. If it were, say you play in a really eclectic band or a cover band or something, and you got to cover or create more sounds than just clean and dirty. Or maybe you're just obsessed with pedals, and when you play guitar, you really prefer to stare at your feet and what your toes are near. Either way, we got you. We're going to dive in. We're going to talk about a bunch of pedal related stuff. But as always, Andrew is going to hit you up with our details here on where you can find the Different Strings podcast online.
DifferentStringsPodcast.com. You go there. Our blog is up there, where we will have occasionally an accompanying blog post for an episode, including this one. And occasionally we'll post some like random thoughts or other tips and tricks that just weren't enough for a whole episode. And also there you can find links to our YouTube. You can find links to our podcast episodes. You can check out our Facebook.
Fantastic. Well, then let's jump right into the appetizer. And since we're going to be talking about pedal boards and pedals tonight, I came up with this two banger that seems pretty self-explanatory on its face, but I'm kind of interested to find out what you're going to say. And so the first of the two questions is, I want to know what the weirdest pedal you've ever had is, whether it's the way it sounds or how you interact with it. It's got 9 knobs and 4 switches or whatever. Just the weirdest pedal you've ever had.
Yeah, I'm boring. I am a boring pedal guy. Like I'm such a traditionalist when it comes to pedals. I didn't have a weird pedal. In fact, I struggle to even call the pedal I'm about to name right now weird, but and I just sold it. That's how not weird it is, and how not weird I am.
Clearly it stuck with you.
Yeah. The Walrus Audio Fathom. It's a reverb pedal. And I wanted to try something different. And I got 2 Walrus audio pedals, that one and the ARP87 also sold. That is a great delay pedal. So you're saying, why did you sell them? If these pedals are so great, why'd you sell them? So you asked me about one of them. I'd say the reverb. The reverb is the weirder of the 2, I suppose. At least that's the one I picked. It doesn't just do spring, like your traditional spring Hall plate reverbs. It also has like lo-fi and some shimmer. And it's great. It was really cool. Just not like my thing. It's I would call the 2 pedals, those Walrus audio pedals, really good for the shoegaze. And you could tell how hip I am by the fact that I called it the shoegaze.
But I think that's what the folks in My Bloody Valentine call it too.
They call it the shoegaze. We're good in the shoegaze. So
they call it the paycheck.
Yeah. So, that's about as weird as I got. I mean, honestly, the weirdest pedal that I've ever used is not a pedal at all. It is part of a piece of software. If you go to, all right, it'll come to me, neuraldsp.com.
Neural, like brain stuff?
Exactly. neuraldsp.com. They make amplifier plugins.
Okay.
And in one in particular, I really like jamming on from time to time is there's a guitar player, Rabia.
Yeah. He's big on YouTube.
Yep. He is big on the YouTube.
Sorry.
It's okay. You'll get there. And he has what's called an archetype plugin, which is his signature plugin. There's one for John Petrucci, which I have. There's one for Tom Morello, which I do not have, weirdly. But the Rabea has a couple of amazing effects in it that's unique to his plugin. One is in a fuzz, one is an octave, but the one that I really love is it's basically there's a whole module of the plugin which is a synthesizer.
Oh,
It lets you turn your guitar into a not even a, I don't even think it's a mono. I think it's a poly synth.
Yeah,
It's wicked.
without all the mucky muck of installing a MIDI pickup.
It's right, and it tracks incredibly well.
Crazy.
I just go check out the Rabea, like the if there's, I'm sure there's a couple demos and on the YouTube. Look for the ones that have that synth effect. That's actually one of the coolest effects I've ever gotten to play through. But would I have a use for it in my music? I don't know. Like I could probably find a use for it. I love it. I love that thing. So that maybe that's my answer, is that's the weirdest, but it's not a pedal because it's all software. But
yeah, I was going to say that's not a pedal.
Yeah, unfortunately, I never had a whammy pedal. I never had like a really weird.
Those are pretty weird.
And there's what is it? The Pog by Electro Harmonics, like
also pretty weird.
And now even like today, there's a plugin called the Ripped Speaker or the Torn Speaker. There's a plugin that emulates the sound of an actual ripped speaker, which if you don't know, kids, the first distortion tone was of a ripped speaker.
Yeah, that and it's a possibly apocryphal story at this point. The Beatles got a fuzz signal on Revolution by overdriving the channel on the board.
Right?
Yeah, but it's reported that, and I forget which of the Davies brothers, but it's one of the Davies brothers.
Well, they both go back and forth, like who's responsible for it, so we don't know which is true or not.
So yeah, and the Kinks actually used a razor blade to cut slits in the speaker to get that angry fuzz sound, which I think then Keith Richards used for the riff in Jumpin' Jack Flash, which also, you know, when you get back that far in the history of guitar stuff, it gets a little weird. Plus those guys did a lot of drugs. So I'm not advocating, I'm just saying it's a fact that Keith Richards did a lot of drugs. That's a fact. He admits it. He's not a role model, folks. So, you know, maybe their memories aren't awesome. You know?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about someone who looked at their speaker and went, you know what would be cool? If I took a razor blade to the cone, because that's irreplaceable and it's very expensive to recone a speaker. And they're just like, okay, I'll do that. So if that's not drugs, what is it?
Yeah,
it's
back
then
you couldn't dial up Amazon and get a speaker delivered to your door in 2 days.
No, that wasn't happening.
So
all right, so that's my lame answer. What about you? What's your weirdest pedal based effect?
You know, I had one in mind, and then you started talking about that plug-in, and I decided I had to call an audible and switch completely. So I'm going to go, my weirdest pedal that I've ever had, and I still have this pedal, is the Electro Harmonics B9 organ machine. And I got this thing almost on a whim. It was really expensive too. I think it was like $250, and it was a really expensive whim. But it basically, what it does is it turns your guitar sound into a bunch of classic keyboard sounds, including a very convincing B9 or oh crap, I can't even remember what it's really called. Hammond, thank you. Organ. And it's, you know, it, and now that I'm talking about it, I remember what happened. I recorded a song with the band I was in at the time, and we wanted to play it live, and it had this kind of extended intro that went, you know, started alone and then went under the first verse. And I didn't want to hump an extra piece of gear. I didn't want to bring a keyboard on stage. That just was too much stuff to carry. So I stumbled completely by luck, stumbled across this pedal on YouTube, and I was like, oh, well, there, I can do that. And it sounds really convincing. I even went back and recorded the keyboard part over with my guitar in this pedal. And it's so you've got a choice of 9 different keyboard sounds, and this is a really good pedal actually for this episode, because you can put a distortion or an overdrive pedal either in front of the pedal or behind the pedal, and it sounds completely different, depending on what you do. So it's really flexible, and it's got all these really great sounds on it, but you really got to hang on to the manual. It's one of those pedals where you got to hang on to the manual, because like the keyboard names are like Fat and Full, Classic Rock, Cathedral. Not really super intuitive names, but of course, because of trademarks, they can't just put down Hammond B3. That's the one I was thinking of, B3, Hammond B3. So they can't put that on the front face of the pedal.
Right.
So you really got to keep the manual handy to know what you're going for. And one of the controls is called click, which doesn't always make sense. But there's a lot going on. And it is really a super cool, but at the same time, really weird pedal.
Nice.
You set it to your clean sound on your amp if you want. You don't have to. And a Hammond comes out of your amplifier and you're playing guitar. It is weird and amazing.
That's cool.
Yeah. And it's not currently on one of my boards, which is why I didn't think of it at first. But when you talked about that plugin, it made me think of it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's my actual weirdest pedal.
I'll go with you on that one.
Now that I know what your weirdest pedal is, tell me what your favorite pedal is right now, because that's going to change over time depending on your execution. Tell me what your favorite pedal is right now, this minute, at 6:45 on whatever today is. I don't want to say the date because the episode's not coming out tomorrow, and why it's your favorite pedal. Hit me with that.
All right. This took a minute. I kind of like all my pedals, but I'd say my favorite at the moment, the one I'm enjoying stepping on the most, is JHS Pack Rat. The idea, so for those that do not know, the Pack Rat is 9 different Rat pedal variants in one pedal.
So it's like a mega fuzzer.
Yeah. And so what I like about this pedal, if you believe the marketing from JHS, when you switch, there's a switch on it. You can switch between the 9 pedal variants. And the Rat is one of those like ubiquitous. It's been around for a million years. And
yeah.
There's the original Rat, and then there's the You Dirty Rat, and there's the Lil Rat, and there's all these different like little variants. And basically it's 9 different variants. And I think a couple of the variants are also his modded Rat, his mod of a Rat, and there's a couple of other third-party mods or like whatever. Anyway, long story short, when you switch on the knob to different variants, you're actually switching the circuit. Like it's the circuit.
Gotcha.
It's not like it's a digital representation of that circuit. It's like this pedal has 9 different Rats in it. It's really cool. And with that, it has its own little unique quirks. Like some Rats are not as loud as others. It's just their output was different. So it's not one of those pedals that you can take live and just, on the fly switch between Rat variants and be okay. Like you really, it's a great studio tool and I would use it live, but I would pick my favorite, which I have, which right now is I guess they call it the white logo Rat or something, the white face. I don't know. That's the one I'm enjoying the most. But what I like about it is even though I love amp distortion, and I do love amp distortion, and there's nothing quite like amp overdrive and amp distortion, the Rat's just cool. I mean, into a clean amp, this thing is wicked. It sounds great. It cleans up great, stacks well with other drives, and it's just a boatload of fun.
And it's not, I looked it up. If you heard me tapping away at my keyboard, I looked it up because I was curious how big it is. given that
Pedal
it's,
sized.
yeah, it's like normal pedal sized, you know, like single, not mini, but not maxi either. And it's only got 4 knobs. Now I realize a regular rat only has 3. So this is
Mm-hmm.
like those 3 knobs plus the click switch.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, would have been cool if they had given you a second foot switch to allow you to cycle through the circuits so that you could change that on the fly without having to lean down. But that
Mm-hmm.
would have required a much larger pedal.
Well,
So,
there's that, and I also, like I said, some of the rat variants have different, varying outputs.
right.
So you
So you'd have
kind
to
of,
mess with the volume knob.
yeah, it's a thing. But what I really like about the rat is not just the JHS, but all rats in particular, is the filter. So the rat in general is, you can use it on bass, you can use it on strats, very bright strats, and you can make it a very dark pedal. You can use it
Yeah.
with like brighter guitars, and you can, or dark guitars, and make it a little brighter. And it's not just a run-of-the-mill distortion. It does get into fuzz land, but it's definitely not a fuzz pedal.
Gotcha.
I consider a rat a distortion pedal first and foremost, with the
I'll allow it.
fuzz, yeah, fuzz tendencies. But I have tried them. So what I've never owned a rat pedal. I know, like, it's weird. It's a weird like pedal I've never owned, but I've owned the Universal Audio plug-in version, which they
Okay.
call the Raw because trademark. And I've used it on guitar. I've used it on bass. I've even used it to get some weird like drums tone, like even on a master for drums or like on a snare or
Yeah,
bass.
cool.
It's cool. So I always liked it. I'm like, why am I not using this on guitar? Like, what am I missing? Now I'm not missing anything. I really
No,
enjoy it.
there you go.
So what about you,
My
man? What's your favorite right now?
my favorite pedal right now is the Strymon El Capistan. And I'll tell you the main reason I bought this pedal, and I got it used, and I waited till I got a good deal. The case is all beat up and whatnot. Because on an old tape machine, there's a physical part of the mechanism called a capstan.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was such a clever play on words, El Capistan,
Mm-hmm.
that it made me stop and pay attention and check out the pedal. And when I discovered it, when I checked it out, I discovered that I thought it was really cool. And I went on Reverb and I waited until I saw one. And then I made an offer for 10% less than that. And the guy accepted and I got the pedal, blah, blah, blah. It's also my one and only Strymon pedal, which I'm not sure I would ever buy a new Strymon pedal because they're really hella expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems almost trite to say it's really versatile and it has lots of tweakability, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
But it really does. Now, here's the funny thing about that, right? I farted around with it for about 4 or 5 hours one afternoon, literally, because as I later found out, it has a bunch of secondary settings that you can access. And the person I bought the pedal from had turned them all on. And so when I first got it, I was like, wow, all of my expectations have been destroyed. This pedal sounds like absolute ass.
Oh.
It was brutal. And I couldn't believe, I felt taken, and
Like,
I'm sitting there and I'm
how, like, right, like,
knobs.
how did I miss how bad
Yeah.
this is? How did I get sucked into the hype?
None of this was in any of the videos I watched. And I don't, as you know, from episode 2, was it episode 2 with where we talked about, yeah, it was episode 2. Sorry. You can't believe everything you see on YouTube, even if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
So I called a friend of mine who is really knowledgeable about pedals, and he's like, weird, man, that's supposed to be a really great sounding pedal. I wonder if we were talking about it and I said something. Yeah. And it sounds like it's not just delay. It sounds like the reverb is on all the time, and it's not a reverb pedal. He said, reverb's a secondary setting. And I said, what's a secondary setting?
Right.
And he said, did you get a manual with it? I was like, no, I didn't even get a box. It just showed up in a USPS priority mail bag,
Mm-hmm.
which is another pet peeve. He said, go look up the owner's manual and figure out how to turn off that secondary setting for the reverb. And I went in, and that's when I discovered all of the secondary settings were on and cranked up. And so once I kind of got the pedal back to its baseline, like, oh, that's the pedal I thought I was getting.
Wow.
And so I found my perfect delay sound, and I leave it on that. I don't ever change it for anything. The only thing I do, I turn it on, I turn it off, and I use the tap tempo button, which, as far as I'm concerned, if you have a digital delay pedal that doesn't have a tap tempo button, it's worthless. That's my hot take for this episode. There's no point in having a digital delay pedal that does not have a tap tempo function.
Not in 2023, kids.
No.
That's cool.
So yeah,
man.
so that's my favorite pedal right now. I really love the thing.
Secondary function. So what did we learn from that? Read the manual.
Read the manual. And now, and even when I buy a used pedal, I look up the manual and read it before I get the pedal, so that when it hits my doorstep, I know what I'm doing.
Now, those secondary functions, are they like, can you turn them on and off without taking the pedal apart? Like,
yeah, if I remember correctly, because once I turn them off, I never turn them back on. You hold down the button, one of the button. Now I feel stupid because I don't know how to turn them on and off.
It's been a while. The only reason I'm asking is because I love the fact that even though you didn't know you were getting it, you got a reverb pedal with your delay pedal.
Yeah.
And a lot of people dig that. And especially for the kind of music you do, there could have been, maybe a useful preset or two in there. I was wondering, like, if you can turn that on, like if it has presets, and if you can turn that secondary effect on or off.
Yeah.
With presets.
So the secondary functions on the El Capistan are a spring reverb, a boost cut function.
Okay.
It's got a low end contour, which sounds to me like a high pass filter.
Right.
It's got a thing called tape bias, because it's called the El Capistan tape echo, digital tape echo. So it's supposed to mimic one of those old tape machines. So it's got a tape bias where you can kind of really futz with the tone. And then it's the last secondary function is called tape crinkle, which if you've ever used an actual tape delay machine, when this tape starts to get worn from overuse, you will hear like artifacts from the tape.
That's so cool.
Literally
they modeled
crinkling.
That is neat. That's very cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I can imagine using it as, and I say this with no irony whatsoever, using it as an effect, like in a recording, to get a specific cool sound for once.
Yeah, very ambient. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So the way you access them, I just looked it up. You hold the bypass and the tap foot switch down while the pedal is on, and while you've got the pedals, the buttons held down, you adjust the knob. Okay. And then when you let go, it sets that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, man.
Yeah.
Well, you just probably just sold a bunch of El Capistans.
It is a really cool pedal. And I think that's a good time to segue into our main course, which is how to build the perfect pedal board of doom for you, with the understanding that everybody is going to have a different idea of the perfect pedal board.
Yeah.
And just because your idea doesn't match up with me doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're an idiot. No, that's not true.
No. So what we're trying to do is give people like a little bit of knowledge and maybe some opinion, but mostly knowledge, so that if they set out to do this, they have some guidelines.
Yeah. So let's start with what is perhaps the most basic aspect of assembling a pedal board, and that is, what order do you put the pedals in?
Oh, right here, you and I are probably going to go. We're just going to land. It's going to lead to fisticuffs.
It's a good thing that we're not in the same room, right? Because I can already tell I want to punch you right in the neck.
Right in the neck.
I'm holding a fork below the camera in my left hand.
Pedal order.
Well, is pedal order really a thing? Like, is that a thing I actually have to pay attention to, Andrew?
You know, it is. It's so crazy. So you said it earlier. And I think that's a really good example. So why am I getting all excited about this? I'm going to tell you why. Because I love the fact this is we're leaning heavy into the gear this week, kids.
Yeah.
Leaning heavy into the gear. Okay. Just think about what you had said earlier about that B9 pedal
Yeah.
and where you put the distortion. Okay. So
I did. Oh, that was a spoiler. I spoiled the whole episode.
completely ruined it.
Oh,
So it's not just about like, because there are pedals, and we'll get to this, that just have to be in a certain place. They don't play nice in certain places. Like we'll get
right.
to that. But for the most part, it's an artistic decision. And do you want your Hammond to get a clean signal, like your Hammond pedal, your B9 pedal to get a clean signal, and then you want to distort that affected signal?
Yeah.
Or do you want to distort your signal and then run the distorted effect into that B9? That's going to read that signal very differently. So you're going to get very different results. And again, what's right and wrong is it's up to you. I definitely see more traditional use of putting the Hammond first. Anything pitch oriented, I would always put before a distortion or overdrive.
Yeah.
However, not a hard and fast rule. And you got to just try and see what you like. You might like both. You might like both for different reasons. And then now
Yeah.
you have a decision to make. But for the most part, there are times and places where you can make an artistic decision. And then there are times when you just like, this must go here for this reason, right? So pedal
Yeah.
order matters. Sometimes it matters more and sometimes it matters less. And it's more of an artistic decision, right?
Yeah.
So where does it matter? Like, where does it really matter? What would you say? What's the number one rule about certain pedal order where it's like you must put pedal here?
Well, here's the thing, right? Um, I I honestly don't think there's a thing that I can point to and say you must always do it this way. But I will say there are pedal order configurations that you can do that make things difficult to get the sound that you're looking for. You know, you can adhering to conventions often makes things easy. So when you use kind of the general idea of pedal order and start there, I think getting comfortable with that layout is what's going to enable you to know when you should break those quote unquote rules, right? So what I tried was somebody, and I wish I could remember who said this to me or where I read it, but it came up to figure this out. Do you want to distort your chorus sound or do you want to chorus your distortion sound? Right at the time, I literally had 3 pedals, all Boss pedals in the little gray B3 case, right? And I had DS1, the orange distortion pedal. I had a CE2, the chorus pedal, and I had a TU2, the tuner. The tuner goes first because that's what I wanted to do. The tuner cuts off the signal, and you don't want to try to tune a chorused signal. You're not going to get a good tuning. So then I just had 2 slots and 2 pedals. I had chorus and distortion. Which one do I put first? And it came up. Do I want to distort my chorus tone or do I want to chorus my distorted tone? And I wanted to chorus my distorted tone. So I put the distortion pedal first and the chorus pedal last, right? Which is kind of how I've continued to do things. So I discovered through trial and error that I like having a buffer on my board. I like having an input output buffer, you know, 2 things in one pedal. So I've got a buffer going in and I've got a buffer coming out. I plug my guitar into a buffer and I plug my buffer into an amp. So I'd like to put the buffer first, but I discovered that my wah pedal sounded crappy after the buffer.
And many do.
For whatever reason. So I put my wah pedal first and then I go into the buffer. When I use a compressor, I put it after the buffer because I want that to get the cleanest, strongest signal. Then all of my uh square wave adjusters, which is boost, overdrive, distortion, fuzz, and I put them in that order. I put boost first to raise my
Mm,
signal up, and then overdrive is less distortion-y than distortion, and fuzz is just crazy, right? Fuzz can get crazy. Um, and then after my fuzz pedal, I will put my modulations. So that is chorus, phaser, tremolo, anything that makes your sound, funky or warbly or anything else like that. And then following the modulation effects, delay, then reverb, and then the buffer out to the amp. And that's the way I do it. That's the way my board is more or less laid out. And
mhm.
yeah, after we talk about it a little bit more, I'll show you a picture of my board. We'll put that up on the screen share. And if you're listening to this podcast episode instead of watching it on YouTube, go to the website, differentstringspodcast.com, and find the blog post for this episode, and you'll get to see a picture of my pedal board as well. So this will make sense. You can pull that up and look at it while you're listening to this, if you want to, or look at it later.
So would it surprise you to hear that I have a very different philosophy on pedal order?
Not at all. I almost expect it, you know, because, well, I
Uh,
mean, we also are doing two different things for most of our playing career, right?
yeah, probably.
Yeah. So yeah. So hit me. What order do you put yours in?
So for I think by and large, I think we're like in the ballpark, which makes
Yeah.
sense. There's certain things that you do that I think like invariably just makes sense to me. And that is, for example, like your delay goes before your reverb. I want reverb on my delay and my echoes, not, I don't want to echo my reverb tails like that.
Right.
Not that it can't be done, but not what I go for. Okay, so pedal order, assuming all of these are on the board, which most times they are not. But first pedal, always, if you are using a vintage fuzz circuit, doesn't mean it's an old pedal, but it means it's a vintage circuit.
Right. Like a
Must,
big muff or something like that.
yep, must come first.
Yeah. I actually agree with that, because I just know they don't interact well with buffers.
Buffered signals, they do not. Um, so if you're using a vintage fuzz, now again, is this a hard and fast rule? No, try it, see where you like it. But I have never placed a vintage fuzz elsewhere in the circuit and went, that sounds great. It's for me, it's always first.
Right.
Followed by the wah pedal. Now, in many cases, the wah when I was coming up and building pedal boards, that was always my first pedal, because
Yeah.
I didn't use vintage wah or vintage fuzzes.
Buzz. Yeah.
And my distortions always came after my wah pedal. That said, I do know some people like their distortions and overdrives before their wah. I am not one of them. I have never heard that sound good to me. So like you, my wah comes before all of that stuff. Now, here's where you and I differ. After the wah comes all of the pitch effects. And
Okay.
surprisingly, you and I see differently. An octave pedal, that's obviously a pitch effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I recently learned that a phaser or univibe, which sound very similar, I've noticed, it's actually more of a pitch effect and less of a modulation, like a time-based effect.
Okay.
So I never really understood this until recently, but because they do sound similar, but apparently a phaser and univibe work on what they do is it's pitch. It's actually adjusting the pitch to get that sound, not like it's not taking two signals and putting them in different places and you're getting like a modulation like you would with a flanger or a chorus. So all pitch effects for me come before the overdrives. If I have an MXR phaser or that univibe, that comes after the wah and before my first overdrive pedal.
Okay.
I have tried those the phaser effect after distortion. It's actually not bad. Like I could almost see it going in both places. The Univibe, however, very different story. For some reason, I only like this thing before those overdrive pedals. I don't like how the Uni sounds when it's being
After.
hit with overdrives and distortions. It's just not my thing. And it
Okay.
makes sense because I like the phaser there too. Okay, so I've gone vintage fuzz, wah, pitch effects like your octave phaser and Univibe. And then finally, here comes the tried and true tube screamer, SD1, your soft clippers, anything that's considered a soft clipper, right? So soft clippers are your clones, right? You have seven
Right.
grand laying around, you buy one of those, or do you have $150 laying around, buy a clone. Your TS9s, your SD1s, your soft clippers. Then comes your hard clippers, your distortion pedals, your DS1, your pack rat, things that are like hard clippers, square wave. Okay. Then here comes my compressor. What compressor after distortion? Are you insane?
What?
I know. So
Well, but it comes back to what I said a minute ago, right? Are you
preference and
trying?
use case.
Yeah. Are you interested in distorting your compressed tone or compressing your distorted tone?
Neither.
And neither. Well, but that's what you're doing. You're compressing your distorted tone by putting your compressor after.
Technically, if I ever had them on at the same time, I never.
Aha!
He said, don't. I don't like. I don't know what it is. Oh, first of all, I don't know why pedal compressors and like these distortion pedals, I don't love that sound
Okay.
together, even if it's
Okay.
before or after. Like it doesn't, I don't know. I don't love it. I know that people sometimes use them for extra sustain. I get it. They also add a little bit of noise. It depends on how you're using it. I just don't do it. I always use my compressor for clean tone. So theoretically, it could go before or after those distortion pedals.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because you're not using them at the same time.
But in the event that I do use it with like the tube screamer, I prefer it to be after the tube screamer, not before
Gotcha.
it. I want to
Okay.
compress my distorted tone. Think about what you're doing in the studio. You're running an amp, you're distorting it, you're running into the board, and then here comes the compressor.
Yep.
Like you're leveling out your sound. That's kind of what I'm doing with the pedal compressor. All right. Then comes all your modulation, which now here comes your chorus and your flanger, your time-based effects.
Yeah.
Then we go delay and reverb. And then finally, I boost pedal, a clean boost pedal, like the EP3 from Exotic.
Okay.
And I do love the EP3 closer to the overdrives and distortions. I do. I think I could have put it before them and I could have put it after them. But for the purpose that it's serving right now, I'm actually using it as a little bit of a solo boost. So by putting it all the way at the end, I'm getting a little bit of a clean but character-driven like solo boost.
Yeah.
And the EP3 is great for that. And we'll get into it later. But if I'm using it, if I'm in a situation where I have an amp with an effects loop, it goes great in the effect loop after the delay and reverb. But it also sounds really nice at the end of all of my pre-effects, like the effects in front of the amp, to just drive the amp a little bit harder while also bringing your signal up. It's really cool, that EP3. So I guess what you heard is, you heard Wes's ideas, you heard my ideas, and you hear there's really only so many like hard and fast rules. Most of this is you just got to try and see like where you like it. So I would say if you're building a board and you're not sure about the order, start with one of our, recipes. But I encourage you to take a weekend and experiment, because you may come up with an order, especially with your particular pedals, that just sound fantastic. And
yeah, and so I'm going to show you a picture of what I call my big board.
Cool.
Let me figure out the screen share here. How do I do that? There we go. Share. All right. So can you see my board there?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to assume that on the recording, everybody else can see the board. Otherwise, I'll send you the picture, and if it's not, you can overlay it. So I'll walk you through the order, and you can see where I've broken my own typical rule that I follow. So bottom right is my SaturnWorks in-out buffer, and you can see I've marked with a piece of tape which one's the in and which one's the out. Although you can do them as long as you're consistent across the pedal, it doesn't matter which one you do with which. So from there, it goes to the tuner, which is the next thing, because I want that to get the even with the distortion on, I want it to get the cleanest signal to the tuner. Yeah. So from there, it goes to the Jupiter Effects Warlow, which is a really angry, they call it a fuzz monstrosity. And I just got done telling you I put my fuzz last, right? But in this setup, the fuzz sounds best first. Right. And it also plays really well with the next pedal in line, which is this 1981 Inventions DRV pedal, which is a rat. It's a rat. I don't want to say it's a rat clone, but it's a rat. It's a riff on the rat. So I found that putting the fuzz before that really amps up the sound of that. So when I run them together, it sounds really cool. And then following that, I have an overdrive pedal from Beatronics. It's called the Overhive.
I see what they did there.
Yeah, I see what they did there. And that's a really cool pedal. You can't really tell in this picture, but it's slanted, which makes it a little tough to use on the back row. But that's why if you look at the pedal that's underneath it, that's why the knobs are taped. So I can kick on the Overhive and not worry about hitting those knobs with my heel and messing up my signal path. So from the Overhive, it goes down to the bottom row, back down to the bottom row to the Beatronics Buzzter, which is a boost. It's not a clean boost. It can be if you turn the little black knob all the way to the left. It's pretty clean, but it has 2 stages of boost. It has loud and louder. So you turn it on and off, and you can also switch between the 2 boosts. And I use that quite frequently. From there, it actually skips the next pedal and goes to the Saturn Works switcher. And then the switcher runs the 3 pedals that are closest to it. The first one is the Spaceman Delta 2. That's a tremolo pedal that runs at 18 volts. And I put that on my board so that I can use the 18-volt outlet in my power supply, which we'll talk about in a minute. The second slot in the switcher is my chorus. The third slot in my switcher is my phaser. And this is an older Boss phaser. It runs at 12 volts. So I have my power supply switched to run that at 12 volts. Then out of the switcher, it goes into the El Capistan. From the El Capistan, it goes into the pedal in the top left, which is the Mojo Hand FX Octaverse, which is a reverse delay with an octave effect. It's very cool. And then from there, it goes back to the buffer and then out to my amp. So you can see that if you go back and listen, rewind it and listen to what I said, the best order is, I broke half of those rules, right away, because as I sat down to experiment with this board, I knew these were the pedals I wanted to use. So I had to figure out what I wanted where and how it worked best. And I discovered that when I put the boost in front of any of the distortion pedals, this particular boost really just changed the sound of that distortion pedal, and it didn't necessarily make things louder. And that's what I wanted, is I wanted a boost, a volume boost. So I solved that problem by moving it after the square wave effects.
Okay. Yeah, and then, I could have very easily, it's interesting how, like, I definitely, if it were me putting this together, I would have tried different things, but my natural order would have definitely put your Overhive before your 1981.
Yeah.
Right.
And I tried those both ways.
Yeah. And so what I like about this is it's clear that, like, I would have tried that. I may not have liked it. I may have loved it. I may not, but like we're basically illustrating, even though there's a guideline, it's got to be based on your given pedals and the tone you're going for. It's just, you gotta try different things. Even if you think you like what you're hearing in a certain order, I'm telling you, just mix things up and try it. You never know what you're going to stumble on.
Yep. All right, I'm gonna figure out how to turn off the sharing here.
But I think while that picture's still up,
Oh, okay.
noticing there's a lot of drives, and that's because I'm guessing you run all of this into a fairly clean sounding amplifier.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is the board that I use with a clean amp, or if I do have a multi-channel amp, it's one that I've used primarily on the clean channel.
Yeah.
Because I want to, when I use this board, I want to have much tighter control over my drive sounds.
And that kind of leads me to the next, I guess, the next tip in building the perfect board for you or for any listener is not about the board at all. It's about the platform. It's about the amplifier, right?
Yeah.
No matter what you do, pedal wise, it's going to sound different depending on the amp you're running it into. So in many cases, like where Wes's board is concerned, Wes is getting the majority of his drive tones, if not all of his drive tones, from his pedals. And his amp is a clean platform. Now, I would guess it's still a great clean sound, because I know you like a good clean sound.
I
And
do.
so, yeah, so there's a lot of great amps out there, single channel, that can get very loud while maintaining a clean tone that sound great. They're called really good pedal platforms.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's
Anytime
also,
you hear an amp referred to as a pedal platform, that's
yeah,
exactly what they're talking about.
yep. And they're actually making some amps now are being made specifically for that purpose, like
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
Wampler Bravado. That and what we'll do is provide some links to some of these things. Wes is using a Supro Thunderbolt, which very cool, very loud amp that I don't think they make anymore. You can still get them used.
Yeah, I
Um,
got mine used. They discontinued it, and mine's it's the Mark II version.
mhm.
So it's actually got switchable power. You can run it as intended as a 30-watt speaker in Class A mode, or you can run it in Class AB mode, and that turns it into this amazing pedal platform that they say it is, and it'll push 65 watts, high headroom, which means it's really hard to distort without a pedal. It will, when an amp is called high headroom, that means you can turn it up really, really, really loud and it won't break up. It won't
Right,
give you that kind of amp distortion sound.
right,
And to back all of that, it uses it's a 115 combo. So it's got a
right. So
15-inch speaker.
not
It
breaking up
has,
the speaker anytime soon.
yeah, not breaking up that speaker. And so when I play it without my pedal board, I run it on Class A, and when I play it with my pedal board, I run it on Class AB, and just I only have to turn it up barely, and it fills a whole room.
Yeah. So your board, I mean, you designed it, and look, this is the advice I'm giving because I've been in this situation where I'm thinking about people that are in a cover band that have to cover, no pun
Cover,
intended, a
yeah,
wide variety of tones. Like maybe you're in the top 40 cover band and you need a clean sound for a lot of clean tones are ubiquitous, a lot of, but you need a lot of varying degrees of overdrives and
yeah,
distortions. You need some, call them wet tones. Wet is usually like delay and reverb, whereas you need more drier tones for rhythm. You got to cover a lot of sonic ground. And in my opinion, this is my opinion, having a 2-channel amplifier with you have clean and distortion can at times complicate matters,
yeah,
right?
a little bit, yeah, sure.
It can. I'm not saying it can't be done, obviously, but I found in situations where I was in a band and had to cover a wide variety of tones, I liked having the clean amp as the platform and using pedals to get your varying degrees of drives. There's just something simple about that. You also didn't have to worry about an effect loop
Right.
because all your pedals run right into the front of the amp. And why that can be a benefit is for fly rigs where you bring a pedal board and you show up to a gig and you have to use someone else's amp and you
Yeah.
are not sure if the amp you're using will or will not have an effect loop. So it helps to have, to me, a board that can work in that situation.
Yeah.
Um,
And for
and
those of you that are in bands that you don't have to travel far enough to fly, you may hear the term backline. We're going to
Mhm.
backline, and it'll be, a twin reverb or a jazz chorus or something, just a basic clean
Always,
amp
yep.
that you can't turn up super loud to get amp breakup. And so that's what they're talking about with a fly rig. Is the same thing if you got a backline.
Yeah. So, I mean, my advice is, and again, you don't have to spend a lot of money to get a good, loud, clean pedal platform amp. You can, of course, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
Um, these days, there's even some, fairly inexpensive amps made specifically for the purpose of running pedals, like the Orange Pedal Baby. This is
Hmm.
it's solid state. I know, oh my God, solid state. But if you're getting most of your tones from pedals, you might want to consider solid state,
Yeah.
especially because if,
Do your back a favor.
yeah, if you want a clean amp, what's going to stay clean and not weigh 1,000 pounds? A solid state amp. Um, so there's one option. Another option, and I don't personally do this, but I have heard it done to great effect, is there's a whole new line of pedals right now that are pedal board, they're pedal amps.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah. Yeah.
basically solid state amps the size of a pedal that are loud and can run direct, or some of them can drive a speaker cabinet.
Yep.
So the benefit to this is just having it on the board. Now you have a backup plan, right?
Yeah.
You
That's a
can
good way to look at it. Yeah.
you can bypass it and not use it, and then something happens to the back line. Plan B is on the board. And a lot of these you can run direct. So now you don't have to worry about, well, I have to run it into an amp and mic it. It's run direct. And some of them are darn good. The Walrus Audio makes one. It's the ACS1, and it's phenomenal. Now, if you want something with more character, Universal Audio just recently released 3 pedals that emulate, a old Fender black face, or a black panel, excuse me, a brown
Thank you.
panel, and what's the other one? Oh, the Vox, the AC30, that piece
Yeah.
of garbage. Um, you know,
That
but
ubiquitous piece of junk.
yeah, that piece of garbage that no one likes. They are really good. And again, like, okay, not cheap, but if you're trying to save your back, and you want to
Yeah.
run pedals,
What's more expensive, a pedalboard amp or back surgery?
traction.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. My buddy Scott, who I'm absolutely name dropping like everybody knows him. He
Scott
plays.
Henderson.
No,
Okay,
I'm not going to say his last name because I didn't ask his permission to out him on this show.
there you go.
He plays in a church band, otherwise known as a P&W, praise and worship band.
Hmm.
And he runs a Strymon Iridium as
Yeah,
his pedalboard amp because
awesome.
they play in a big square echoey room. So they have to be able to control volume as everything's
Yep.
going on during the service. So they electronic drums, they run everything direct to the board. They have a dedicated sound person. So that in that operation, it's absolutely, I would say, critical to be able to do that if you're in a situation like that, or also for a fly rig, especially if you're running in-ear monitors, right? And you have to control stage volume, because in-ear monitors are good, but if they're functioning as monitors and earplugs, they're liable to get stressed. So if you can just run them as monitors and not have to worry too much about anything other than the drums on stage, then you're going to get a much better experience as the person playing on stage. So, and these things are getting better all the time.
Smaller, cheaper, better.
Yeah, when I used to pick on Scott for using this pedalboard amp, and then he sent me some board tapes. They're not tapes, right? He sent me some sound directly from the board. And I'll be honest with you, Andrew, I felt like a dick
Dude, I'm
because
telling you.
I couldn't have told you that he wasn't using an amp,
Yep.
a traditional amp.
Yep, that Strymon Iridium is the real deal. When we were having the discussion about this episode and we were putting the outline together, that was one of the top choices for people that are looking to reduce their backline size, to control their stage volume. It's becoming like, do you go with the Universal Audio Dream 65, the black panel Fender, or do you go with the Strymon Iridium? It's like, it seems to be like those are the two big players right now. Both of them sound truly, truly amazing running straight into the board. Unless I would argue we're in the golden age of technology when it comes to guitar playing. And those praise and
it's
worship
only going to get
bands,
better.
Yep, those praise and worship bands, mind you, leaders in technology when it comes to gear. I know there's a lot of them who run all of their guitar rigs and all of the keyboard rigs and set lists, everything from like an iPad.
Yeah.
And like everyone's synced up and like there's lyrics right there and it controls the switching and like for some reason that particular genre of music, and they're just very, I think maybe because specifically they're playing these large rooms, however they're rooms where the volume needs to be controlled on the stage.
Yeah,
they have to embrace technology in a big way. Like there's just no choice. People are not jumping in there with like these large tube amps. So they're leading technology, which is kind of cool. So there's a lot of P&W guitar players out there with really cool like tech videos on YouTube right now.
Yeah, and I recently got into something like this. It's not, I didn't get an Iridium or one of those like dedicated pedalboard amps. What I got was a Vox MV50 Brian May, right? Everybody knows I'm a huge Queen fan. You slap Brian May's name on something and I will consider buying it and probably check my bank account real quick.
He said with the Brian May guitar in the background.
Right there. So Vox came out with this amp a couple of months ago, and it's a very small amplifier, obviously solid state. They tout something they call new tube. It's a little tiny lights up blue. I'm not convinced it's a real tube, but the amp sounds pretty good. And I put it onto what I call my portable rig. So it's just basically got everything I need. And then I added a reverb pedal because the amp doesn't have reverb built in.
It's based on a Vox AC30, which has no reverb.
Right. And then, it powers a speaker. It can power it. I don't want to say it scales, but depending on what the ohm rating of the cabinet is, the amp is either, I think it's 100 or 50 or 25 watts, depending on what load you're putting it on. So I run it into an 8 ohm cabinet, which gives me 50 watt equivalent. And I usually never have to turn it up past about, 3 or 4.
Okay.
And it works great. I use it for band rehearsal. And I might even use it at a gig this coming up Friday in 2 days. I haven't decided yet. But it changed the way that I think about amplifiers, because it enabled me to cut one thing out of the process. It's one more thing I don't have to carry. I don't have to carry a pedal board and an amp and a speaker, or an amp speaker, right? All I need is a pedal board and a speaker.
Well, what about if you're one of those guys that just absolutely has to have an amp and you don't believe that pedalboard amps are any good? What would you say, to
that
those
person?
guys? Yeah.
I say you can believe whatever you want to believe. That doesn't mean you're right. But, when it comes to your tone and what you want to sound like on stage, you be you, dude. Do what you need to do to be happy on stage. That's all I got to say about that.
That's all I got to say. So I love that. The amp discussion is like, for me, I feel like that's a important piece in the whole pedalboard recipe.
Yeah.
But now we're going to get back onto the pedalboard, and again, spoiler alert from before, you showed you have this cool little Saturn Works, right? Is that, I'm saying that right? Saturn Works switcher.
Yes, the
Never heard of
Saturn Works
Saturn Works.
switcher.
I I think, and this was your suggestion to this. This was one of your additions to this outline. Um, Consider, if you're going to have a lot of pedals, recognize you have two choices: either tap dance your way to fame or get a switcher.
Yeah.
These, there are now, and again, where have these been my whole life? There's these things coming out now. They didn't exist 30 years ago, but now they're out and about and they're great. Not all of them are MIDI, although there are MIDI ones. But there's plenty of these switchers hitting the market. You showed yours, which is a very small, simple, easy to understand. Like, it's just got 3 loops in it. Like, that's,
Yeah, it's like the analog version of these amazing switchers that people have put out.
So
And it's really, really simple. The first ones I remember were called loopers, Looo, looper. Apparently that company's out of business. I couldn't find them, but I found Saturn Works that does the same thing. And yeah, I mean, you can get them, you know, short and skinny, you can get them tall and skinny, you can get them wide, you can get them big. I got the 3 switch in the triangle thing there. And what it does do is it lets me, depending on how I angle my foot, I can hit 2 buttons at the same time. So if I want to switch between tremolo and chorus, I can do that with 1 stomp if I hit both things. But what I can't do is I can't turn on my chorus and turn off my fuzz and turn on my delay all at the same time with 1 press of a button. I can't, there's no patches to save.
Right, exactly.
Right. And it works for me in my situation in the band that I play in, because I don't have to do that. I don't often have to do that.
Right.
I've figured out I've structured my parts so that I can turn pedals on and off as I go through the lines.
Right.
You know,
but you know, for those who might need something more complex, and we know you're out there.
Yeah. Or just want something more complex, because it's fun to figure this stuff out and to man, I love tech stuff like this.
Yeah. So the one that I landed on, and trust me, I have maybe scratched the surface, barely scratched what this thing's capable of, but I will share with you what I know is the Bossy S8. This thing is like crazy popular. It has 8 independent loops. So you can put 8, I mean, when I say 8 independent loops, I mean like 1 or more pedals can go in a loop. You can, if you want, to put 2 pedals in a loop, and basically now that means you can switch off 1 or 2 or even 3 or 4 pedals at the same time, which, if that's your thing, you can do that. So it has 8 loops, and so you can run it in 2 modes. The first mode is just your performance mode, where literally all 8 buttons turn on and off your loops. There's also a mute switch, and it has a separate tuner out, so you can run your tuner completely independent of your signal path, which is kind of cool. Or you can run it in preset mode. Now, what preset mode allows you to do is create presets where certain loops are on or off, you know, any combination. So let's say you have delay in loop 7 and reverb in loop 8, and you have drives in loop 4. You can set a preset where all of those are on at the same time, off at the same time, any combination, whatever you want, it'll turn them on or off at whim. And here's another cool part.
With 1 press of one button.
Press of a button in preset mode. Here's another cool thing. You can change the order of the loops. So right now, you know, in normal mode, you have loops 1 through 8 in that order, chronological order. But let's say you want to change the order of your loops for a particular preset. You want to move your compressor, pre or post distortion, whatever you want to do. You can set up a preset where it changes the order of the loops. That's insane. So now you can control the order of all your pedals however you want. So pedal order is now like, I can be flexible with that. That's kind of cool.
That to me is the best aspect of these kinds of high-tech switchers, because You know, the way that mine works, the analog version, if I turn on all of the pedals, it goes tremolo, chorus, phaser every time, all the time, period, end of story. I can't ever put my tremolo after my chorus,
Hmm.
you know, because
Yep.
that's just the way it's set up. So to
Yep.
be able to do that, especially it's
Wait,
that just blows my mind.
wait, it gets better. Here's
Oh,
something I didn't
wait,
know it could do.
but wait, there's more.
Yeah, check this shit out. All right. So if you use this thing in 4 cable method, right? So we know 4 cable method is you're running an amp. So now imagine that you're not using it with a single channel amp. You're using
Okay.
it with an amp with an effect loop. Okay.
Okay.
So you can use this thing in 4 cable mode. One cable goes to the switcher, then it goes to your effect return, then to send, then to the amp output. So you can do that, right?
I need
That's
a
what I do.
whiteboard.
I know that's what I use my junction box for. I'll explain that in a second. Um, you can use it in 4 cable mode, but here's a cool thing. You can change where the effect loop patch happens. So
Oh
think about what
man.
so think about what I'm saying. Your pedals go in order 1 through 8, and let's say your delay and reverb is in 7 and 8, and your chorus is in 6.
Okay.
Okay. And you want a preset where your chorus is in your effect loop. So you can change your effect loop patch point to be before loop 6. So
Huh.
now 6, 7, and 8 are in the loop. But what if you want a different preset where you move the chorus to the pre-effects? You can move the effect loop patch point to be after loop 6. So now only your delay and reverb are in the effect loop. And that is nuts.
Yeah, that is nuts.
And it has an output for channel switching amplifiers with a TRS cable. So if you have a channel
Oh,
switching
dude,
amp, now
that
you
is
can switch
sweet.
your amp. And guess what else it has? You know it, MIDI.
Oh, dude, that's insane.
So if you put MIDI effects on your pedal, not only can you switch them on and off with the loops, but you can change presets on your MIDI pedals if you have a pedal that runs off MIDI. That is
Wow.
pretty ridiculous. If I built a rig with this, I would lose my mind. I would have to
Yeah,
put my I'd have to
you need
I'd
a
have to take
degree from MIT just to figure
two
out
or
how to
three
order the
weeks off.
pedals.
Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks off of work, just hunker down. But is it overkill for what I do? Probably, maybe.
But it's
If
not going to be overkill for everybody. And I think there are definitely guitar players out there who can benefit from that level of flexibility.
Yeah,
Plus, you don't have to get the 8-loop one. They make a 5-loop version,
right. So you
right?
don't have to
So,
go crazy like me. But I was my goal with this, I was planning on using this with a Rush cover band that
oh
never
yeah.
came to fruition because pandemic.
Well, that's a shame.
And I was all right. And I was also planning to use it. A friend of mine that really wants to get his music off the ground. And although you don't, it's, I would say you can keep your parts simple. I like to mix things up a little bit. And so
Yeah.
I thought this thing would be really cool for that. And I'm just kind of waiting for the right moment to use it. So maybe by the time that happens, it'll be ready to go. We'll see.
Yeah. And there are other versions. Even Boss makes a more simple one that's in a regular Boss pedal size. It's called the line selector. It's a really simple version of this. When I was thinking about adding a switcher to my board, I looked at the ES8, but I
Mm-hmm.
also looked at one from England by a company called the Gig Rig. It's their G3.
Mm-hmm.
It's another one of these switchers. And here's let me tell you my concern. And this is the number one reason I did not get an effect switching system. Patch cables.
Oh, patch cables.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm stuck a little bit in patch cable purgatory, right? Okay, so Planet Waves, George L's, I think Diodario, they all make these patch cable kits where you get a spool, you get like 20 feet of raw cable, and you get a bunch of tips, straight and angled tips.
Hold on. You jumped right to the gourmet dessert. You need to
Maybe.
dial back 100 years to
Well,
when
see,
you and I first started playing, and tell me
the
what your patch cable game was like in the 80s.
it
What
was
was
it was the plastic molded colored cables that were, you
yeah,
know, orange and yellow and
yeah.
red, and
Your choices were red or yellow. And
yeah,
they lasted 3 gigs because they were plastic molded and they garbage.
yeah, they
They
were
were
garbage.
disposable. Like patch cables were a thing. Like studios used patch cables to, patch rack effects in and out of the channel, the signal when you were using compressors and all these outboard effects. What we were using was a toy,
Yeah.
basically. So years go by. This is like what we're stuck with. And then like one day, like Proco started making the metal ended ones, and
Yeah,
they
and
came
those
in
were
like
better.
they came in 2 lengths, 3 inches or 58 feet. Like
Yeah,
there was there was no custom anything. And then one day,
I think George L's was the first.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and I got a George L's kit, and I mean I keep a George L's kit because they're okay. I'll put the end at the beginning. I don't trust them in a high pressure situation, but they're great in an emergency.
Mhm.
Right? If you absolutely have to have a specific length patch cable and you can't go buy it, you can make it. And that's this 100% reason I've had. And it's probably, honestly, it's probably me. You know, I don't want to blame the hardware. I'll blame the operator.
No, it is not you. I've been using solderless patch cable kits roughly since they came out.
Yeah.
And I not only do I have mixed luck with making the cable. So a solderless cable is a pressure fit. It's a
Yeah.
twist on, obviously solderless, but the connection is all like, well, we're going to screw a metal bit into the cable to make the connection.
Yeah.
And by and large, this is squiffy at best. I
At
just
best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't trust them. Like you said, high pressure situations aside, making solderless patch cables is a bit of like a labor of love. You have to really like not like yourself to make a lot of it's not fun.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be easier than solderless or soldered, and it is
Yeah.
technically in some cases, but I don't trust them, and they're not always easy, and you wind up making more cables than you need, or more cables than you should need, because you mess them up and you have to start over. Yeah. So
Yeah. And I think the place to use those solderless kits is on a pedal board that never moves.
never changes.
Yeah, never change.
Yeah,
You
where
don't
you're
change
not
the
taking
pedals out a
cables in
lot.
and out of pedals a lot.
Yeah, and you don't pack it up and go to a gig. You know,
Oh,
it's your pedal board that sits at home on your floor in front of your amp all the time, and you never have to put any stress or strain on those cables.
Boss makes a solderless kit finally. Like
Yeah,
Boss
you'd
took
think
forever
they
to
would have
get
been the first.
right. They were slow to get into the game, and actually,
That
it's
probably
not.
says something.
It's I'm wondering, like, they waited until they could get a kit. It's actually not that bad. Of all the solderless kits I've tried, Planet Waves, George L's, what's the Lava Cable, and Boss, I actually like the Boss kit the best. I'm not gonna lie. Um, it's still not perfect, but it is way better. So if you're out there listening, you're like, hey guys, stop ragging on solderless like I live
Yeah.
on. Okay, it's all good. But I do like the Boss kit.
Yeah, they call
Um,
it the BCK24 solderless pedalboard cable kit.
yeah. So, Wes, as I pull out my pipe and smoke it, some of us have gotten so sick of paying high prices for cables only to be let down by the quality.
Yeah.
We have started, I'm saying we, because, we're a very elite, select few.
Yes.
We've started to roll our own.
Yeah, and I'm really intimidated by that because so I struggled with patch cables, and that's one of the things that, when my last board died, the power supply died. I stopped using pedal boards for a long time. I just put all my pedals in a drawer. because I was using the George L's, and I had to keep spares with me all the time, and I found myself making new cables at a gig. Of
Right.
course, you got to figure out which one's bad first, which is a
Oh yeah.
hassle,
When you
you
have
know.
4 pedals, there's a lot of cables.
Yeah. So I discovered these flat patch cables.
Hmm.
So instead of being a round cable, you know,
Ribbon
it's
cables.
a flat, yeah, with low profile ends. They're made by a company called Tour Gear Designs. And you know, maybe that technology is not super special, but what they did that I really like, the twist that made me a customer for life,
Hmm.
is you can get a C cable or you can get an S cable, right? So you can get a cable where the ends both point the same direction, or you
Hmm.
can get a cable where the ends point opposite directions. So
Oh,
if you're putting a cable with side jacks next to a pedal with top jacks, you want the
ah,
S cable. It doesn't twist the cable. And I think that's brilliant. And I use those primarily because you specifically intimidate me with your patch cable manufacturing process, and
yeah.
I can't. I know that I don't have the patience to sit and do that. So tell me where that comes from,
All right.
please.
So if I'm being completely honest with you, I learned to solder. Like I taught myself how to solder years ago, and
It's
I've been
not that
doing
hard.
it.
You just got to practice. Anybody can solder.
Right. We covered this in a recent episode.
Yep.
Um, and I was thinking of building a board fairly recently. I rediscussed. So I stopped playing guitar. You guys should know that. I stopped playing guitar for like a couple of years. I just put it aside, and I got back into it. And I had no pedals, and I had no amps. And like I kind of want to get some pedals.
Yeah.
And then I
As you do.
decided, yeah, as you do. And that led to a lot of pedals. But long story short, I wanted to build like a really good board. And while I was studying like which pedals to get, I ran into a couple of YouTube videos by professional pedalboard builders, and I just became like infatuated with the idea
Yeah.
of building a really like high quality, neat, clean, custom cabled pedal board. Like I just found I was not paying some guy, you know, it's a lot of work. I'm not paying for that kind of work.
Yeah.
But I looked at it and I thought, what are they doing that I can't do? I put my own pickups in,
Yep.
it's soldering. All of the materials are available online in bulk. So
Yeah.
what am I missing? Weirdly, I never knew how to make a cable. I've learned how to solder. I can take pickups in and out of guitars. Never learned how to make a cable, and I'm like, this is something I just have to do.
Yeah.
And so I taught myself how to make a cable. I taught myself how to make RCA cables, which is not easy, not hard, but it's the same theory. It's just different plugs. I even taught myself how to make RCA cables specifically for the Chox pedal board, which are like reverse polarity.
Polarity. Yeah.
Um, I taught myself how to make patch cables, and I taught myself how to make Mogami, regular Mogami cables, the same plugs that you guys use that you're buying, the same cable. I'm paying like way less per cable. I'm making them my own custom length. They're sturdy as hell. I'll never buy a cable again. So what I'm going to do is in the blog post accompanying this episode, I'll put links to all the cool like raw materials
All right. Cool.
and the videos that I saw that really made me like inspired to do this. But what I'll tell you is I know it does take patience, it does take time, and you have to buy all the material. Like you need a good soldering iron, you need to get good
Yep.
solder. Like I get that.
Yep.
Once you start doing this, you will never go back. That's a level of self-sufficiency
Yeah.
that you and the confidence you gain from knowing how to do this. Like I wish I'd been doing it for years. So I used Mogami miniature instrument cable for patch cables. You can either use 2314, which is really flexible. So that's what I use, or you can go with the 2319. It's a little thicker. Um, there's new plugs out on the market called square plugs. These things
Nerd.
are a godsend, dude.
Nerd.
Well, square plugs. The square plugs are either they're right angle, but they're flat pancake style,
Yeah.
right? So they're really good for like tight pedal boards where you want like a lot of pedals and a little bit of real estate.
Yeah.
And they also make the SPS4, which is a short body straight. That's what I used on my ES8 because you
Okay.
can't use the right angles because you have to.
They're all packed in so close
all,
together.
right.
Yeah.
So one end is the SPS4. Now, also because I'm using a junction box, which I made myself because nerd, which I'll also share in the blog post.
All right. I'm not impressed anymore.
I made a junction box. I used SPS4s on those too, but I could have used right angle if I put it underneath, or I don't know. Like,
yeah,
I just nerded out. I nerded out. But dude,
why did you make a junction box? Tell me.
Okay.
There's a reason for it. You didn't
There
just
is a
do
good
it.
reason for it, because this is the next part. If you're going to do any cabling, you're using solderless, you're making your own, you're buying, whatever you do, you 100% need to keep your shit straight. Keep the board tidy and clean.
Yeah.
Keep your cables and your audio cables and your power cables separate. Do not loop them together and tie them together in pretty bows. Keep them separate because noise. Okay.
And there's just to tag on to that. I'm sorry, I apologize for interrupting you, but I want to say this before I forget. In amp building, they are very careful to take power cables and sound transmission wires, and cross them at right angles.
Yes,
as much as possible, because that helps minimize noise.
Great point. So that's a thing. That is a real thing. So you can buy all these expensive power supplies and really great pedals and then have all this noise and go, that's the problem. Yeah. So, okay. Keep it neat and tidy. Cable ties, get good cable ties, keep everything neat and tidy. There's a lot of reasons to do this. One, you keep my OCD from triggering. Okay. And that's critical. If you're going to send pictures of pedal, when I see that spaghetti, it triggers me.
It does.
It's triggering. It's nerve wracking. And then we're like, yeah, man, how come my shit don't work?
That's why.
I wonder.
Yeah. Yeah. I got these little stick on, they use them in computers.
Yep.
A lot. It's just a little stick on thing with a hump in it that you can pass a cable tie through. And I got those. Those are all over the bottom of my board to keep my cable runs tidy.
So why a junction box?
Yes, why a junction box?
Two solutions. Okay, so when you are gigging, setup time, keeping setup time to a minimum is critical. That's number one. You don't want to be that guy who's
nope.
Yep. Okay, so that's number one.
Imagine the guy that shows, and I played with this guy not terribly long ago, that showed up to a gig with a bag full of pedals and a bag full of patch cables, and then spent 20 fucking minutes, you can edit that out, putting his pedals on the floor and connecting them together one at a time. And then the first pedal he steps on, he kicks it and it unplugs, and all the sound drops out. No pedal board, no nothing. Oh man. I couldn't watch. Their music was good when he had signal.
They do say geniuses think on a different plane than the rest of us. And
and maybe he's just on that plane.
They say Sherlock Holmes didn't know that the earth went around the sun because he considered that useless information.
Yeah. Well, and he just assumed that the sun orbited around him.
No, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the character that Sherlock Holmes was so brilliant.
Yeah.
In what he did, it was one of the reasons was he eliminated all that extraneous knowledge. It wasn't relevant that the Earth went around the sun. Now I argue that you would. I know. Anyway.
Yeah. Maybe I apologize for the F-bomb. That's uncharacteristic.
Okay. No, I might leave it in. It added some seasoning. All right.
There was some passion there.
I'm kidding. Junction boxes. One, it does help.
Junction boxes.
It helps keep. If you're running into the front of an amp and you have cable into pedals into amp, maybe you don't need a junction box. I can see that. Okay. But I would argue you may still want one, and I'll tell you why. There's a couple of things you can do with a junction box. One is you can get all your cables connecting to one box in the same location on your pedal board. Okay. And you can hide that location underneath the board where it will be away from random drunk people
stepping
on your cables and breaking them off inside your pedal. I swear to you, that was the #1 reason I switched to junction boxes. Moving all of your connections under the board, and literally under the board, where there would be no one. The worst thing that could happen is a drunk could come on stage and pull a cable out. And if you do that right, if you set them up right, you can kind of like loop them so that even that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But I have in the past had someone step on my pedal board
and snap that
right on the cable where it met the pedal, and boink, out it came, cable still in pedal. It was
end of the gig.
Right. So I built a junction box. The second reason is it does help keep things neat and tidy, especially if you use a snake of some sort.
Yeah.
So what I do is the 4 cables, because if you're running the 4 cable method, you go into, guitar into pedals, then you need to send and return 2 more cables, and then you need a cable to go into your amp.
Right.
4 1/4-inch cables. Of course, I made my own smoking pipe. And then I got one of
nerd.
Excuse me. That's Dr. Nerd.
Dr. Nerd. Professor Nerd to you.
Professor Nerd, yeah. Wait a minute, you're the professor.
Yeah.
And then
nerd.
And then right. And then history, by the way, folks.
Yeah.
History professor.
Super nerd.
European, am I right?
Yeah.
Getting into it now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Pot calling kettle black.
Yeah, at least I'm not sitting around making my own cables.
Listen. I kind of asked for that. I asked for that.
I apologize. I'm better than that.
I sincerely look. You just learned something about Wes you may not have known. The man is a history professor. He's a history professor,
and a damn good one too, I might add.
Yeah, well, he taught me a thing or two about a thing or two. So here's the thing: pedal snakes. Oh, 4 cables. I
bought, you made your own.
No, I bought cables. I didn't make my own. I bought them.
Okay.
And then you get like this expandable nylon tubing.
Yeah, and you kind of combine them together. I mean, you corral them together.
Indeed, corralling, sir. And you can make your own snake. How cool is that?
Very.
You make your own pedal board snake. Now, there is a company out there, Pedal Python, that
will do it for you.
Yeah, they will do that they send you the nylon expandable tubing, but you can get that tubing now on Amazon if you can just find the right size.
Yeah.
But dude, you make your own. Now you have one cable, one snake running from your board to your back line. That's wicked. That's that is super clean, easy to set up. You're 5 minutes, you're done. You can spend the rest of your time, hitting on groupies, getting drunk before the first song, all professional behavior.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
Now, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you again, but I want to make sure that you talk about the age-old question with the 4 cable method, to loop or not to loop, because like I have 2 amps that have effects loops. I have used them. I'll tell you what I use an effects loop for. When I'm recording with my high gain amps, I run a noise gate through the effects loop. And that's literally the only thing I ever use my effects loop for. I put all of my pedals in front of the amp.
I love that. And that brings the noise floor down?
The noise gate, it eliminates it in between, like if you're doing, whenever you stop playing, it cuts off the hiss, man. It's brilliant. I use an old Rocktron Hush.
But it does it in a musical way.
Yeah, it does it in a very natural. I mean, you gotta set it right. You can set it to really suck if you try. You can't choke everything off, but it worked. They work great. Yeah.
So
talk to me about loops. How did you decide to use a loop? Because I never use a loop.
Okay. So Yeah, I totally hear you. And let's be honest, again, it's all about personal preference. But I would say if you are using an amp and the amp has, and you're using the amp's distortion, it has a channel two, has an overdrive channel, you're probably going to be disappointed with the sound of a delay and reverb pedal going into the front of that amp.
Yeah.
Right. So earlier we were talking about the perfect pedal platform, and it's a clean amp. And the reason for that is because no one really loves, I mean, there is a place for it.
Sure.
And it for ambient tones, it can sound amazing. But by and large, running distortion on the amp overdrive, and running a delay or reverb in front of that can be disappointing. It can be muddy. It can be cacophonous. It's just
Yeah.
not great. Can be done, has been done. Some really cool tones have been recorded like that. But if that's the tone you're going for, solid. But if you're trying to mirror studio quality effects,
It's probably not going to happen that way.
right, exactly. So that's, to me, when effect loop becomes almost an imperative, is when you're using a 2-channel amp and you're using your modulation time-based effects like delay and reverb.
Yeah.
It sounds better. Again, not a hard and fast rule, but I would argue
Sure.
that, yeah, there's a very good reason why that works. So again, your mileage may vary.
And let me ask a question, because a lot of people may not know this, and I feel like you do. Where in the signal path is the effects loop in an amp?
Oh, so it's a patch between the pre and the power amp.
Okay, so the preamp is where you get, the preamp is your tone generating process.
Mm-hmm.
Then effects loop send out to your pedal board where you put your delay and reverb and etc. Then back to the amp, return, and then inside the amp it goes from the effects loop return into the power amp, which is the part of the amp that makes it loud.
Yeah, and the first effects loops were actually not called effects loops. They were called, it was a preamp send. So the send and return,
Sure.
it was called preamp send and preamp return,
Yeah.
or power amp return. So it's a patch between the preamp and power amp, as you said, and it sends the preamp signal into your pedals, and then it returns the affected signal back into the power section. So
Perfect.
it's much cleaner. Yeah. So, again, your mileage may vary. Now, effects loops are not all created equal. They've gotten better. To some amps have incredible effects loops.
Yeah, buffered, tube driven.
Yep.
A lot of them, they have send and return level controls.
Rivera does that. Yep.
Yeah. I think Mesa has just a general volume, effects loop volume.
Yep. Now I have 2 Friedmans back there that do not have adjustable, but they do not need it for whatever reason. It's fine without it. I don't need it. But effects loops with adjustable send and return is always handy to have if you can get it. So anyway, that's my feeling on effects loops.
I think that's a good one. I appreciate the explanation, and I think the cleanliness is next to toneliness, and the loop kind of work together along with the junction box, because what we're talking about is keeping your pedal board layout under control and also keeping your tone under control. You have the most flexibility in controlling your tone by using a junction box and an effects loop, or not, right? Your choice not to use either of those things is also perfectly valid, and it works just fine for you. You have to make it work for you.
Okay. One of the biggest challenges with building a pedal board is not getting high quality and like a variety of tones. Like most pedals these days, there's so many great pedals out there. Buffered or non-buffered, we didn't get into. No. I don't know that I want to get into that. All I will say is have a mix.
Yeah, we didn't talk about true bypass either. You know why?
We already covered that.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, we covered that in the past.
Yeah, we talked about that in our myth episode.
Yes, and what we've learned is true bypass is perfect and non-true bypass sucks.
Sucks. That's right.
Right. So take your Boss pedals and your millions of pedals sold and
And stick them where the sun don't
stick them where the
shine.
sun don't shine. So when you're building a pedal board, noise is your worst enemy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so where does the noise come from? Well, let's talk about non-pedal board noise. Your guitar will
Yeah.
make noise.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The
60
room,
cycle hum from those single coil pickups.
the room, right? Be very wary, even with humbuckers, that the room you're in and how it's wired and all the interference in it will affect noise. You could be chasing noise that isn't being, generated by your pedal board. So
Yeah.
find a room that works and, do your building in there, or just know that, hey, my room makes noise and I can't solve for that. But
Oh, dude,
I
it
know.
drove me crazy. I have dirty power at my house, and
Mhm.
that's the only thing I can think of. My pedal board, I could not find the source of the noise. I could not figure it out,
It's very
and
frustrating.
it drove me nuts. I finally got a power conditioner to plug into the wall, and then I plug all my stuff into that.
Mhm.
But what I noticed was that whenever I would go to a gig, no noise.
That's a miracle. Usually it's the other way around.
Yeah, usually it's the other way around, but I had so carefully managed noise on my board to deal with my home power situation
Right.
that it ended up being beautiful for gigs.
That's great.
There's one place that we play on a semi-regular basis where when they turn the house lights on, if my rig is still active, it'll go,
Yeah, yeah.
because whatever the house lights are doing.
Yep.
But the
So
house lights are on when I'm not playing, so I don't
yeah.
care.
So guitar, obviously, your guitar could be making noise, so be careful of that.
Yeah.
All of your cables, not just the ones that I'm saying you should make, or the ones, whether it's soldered or solderless, even the ones you buy, if you don't buy quality cables, or even if you do, and
Sometimes they can just make noise.
your cables can make noise. So test cables one at a time.
Yeah.
One at a time. Okay. And remember, noise amplifies, or it's additive.
Cascades.
Yes. So if you have a cable that makes a little noise and another cable that makes a little noise and another cable, guess what? It all adds up.
Lots of noise.
There's one more place we haven't talked about, and that is your power supply. You could solve for everything else. And your patch cables and your power cables, keep them separate. But aside from that, your power supply, you can do all of these things right. And if your power is not clean and your power supply is not isolated, you are going to have problems. So, Wes, I have been using Voodoo Labs pedal power for a while, and then I recently switched to Chocks.
Right, which is spelled CIOKS, by the way.
Yeah, I believe they're Dutch.
Sure, we'll go with that.
Chocks, CIOKS. To me, the three. Oh, no, I shouldn't say three, because there's probably a lot more than that. But the three I looked at were True Tone, Chocks, and Strymon.
Okay.
Now I think Voodoo Lab makes an isolated power supply, and what that means is each outlet is isolated from the others.
Yeah,
and that's critical.
Yeah, it really is for a couple different reasons. You're talking about noise. Isolated outputs cut way down on noise, but isolated out. Okay, so let's stop for a second and hit pedal theory just a little bit. There's two things that electricity wise that you need to keep in mind when it comes to pedals. One is volts, right? That's the power that it takes to turn the pedal on.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's milliamps, which is the amount of electricity it takes to actually operate the pedal.
Right. The draw.
Right. The draw. Right. So you've got to energize it with the volts, and then you've got to operate it with the milliamps. So pedal supplies have a limited number of milliamps available per port. And if it's an isolated pedal power supply, then each port has its own milliamp rating.
Limit, right? There's a limit.
Yeah. So if your power supply is not isolated, then your milliamp limit incorporates all
of them.
of the ports. So you gotta know what your draw is on your various pedals. And for most pedals like Boss pedals and JHS pedals and all those
It's
kind of
fairly low.
normal, yeah, it's low. We're talking, max of like 50 milliamps. When you get into big pedals like Strymons,
Digital pedals in
digital pedals
particular.
especially, there's a reason that the Strymon Zuma power supply puts out 500 milliamps per port, and that's because their pedals are just milliamp suckers,
Yep,
right?
as milliamp suckers. That's a good
So
band name.
yeah, we could probably
Shocks.
do a whole episode just on power supplies.
Yeah.
And I did a breakdown in a blog post of all of the pedal power supplies that were available, one per brand, available on Sweetwater. And I break down the specs. So you can go look at that at differentstringspodcast.com.
Man, what a great tool and a great plug for the website.
Yeah. And I
Rock.
also included a bunch of different, for examples, the pedals that I use and a bunch of other pedals, just so you can get an idea what the milliamp draws are. And I talk about all these things in much more depth than we can get into in, the context of like a 2-ish hour episode. Because we could talk about power supplies literally for 7 hours.
Man, we probably could, and
Yeah.
we probably should not.
So you're using a Chalks. How many ports? What's your number on there?
How many ports? I'm using 3 chocks.
3. Are they daisy chained, or do you run individual power cables?
Well, the chocks allows you to daisy chain without losing. Yeah. So I have a DC7, and then that's like the big mama. And then I have 2 smaller, I think they're C8s. So for like the massive board, I would run all 3, but for my condensed board, I'm only running 2 because the DC7, 7 ports isn't enough. So I had to run at least one more, the C8. I think it's the C8. The piggyback. So there's like a cable that allows you to daisy chain them. And yeah, so here's another tip I want to mention about noise though.
Pro tip:
separate your digital time-based pedals if you can, and your tuner from your other pedals, especially distortion and overdrive.
Yeah.
So that is if you can. I don't know if you've ever heard digital clock noise. It's like this weird clicking sound.
Yeah.
But digital pedals have a clock in them. Time-based pedals actually have a little digital clock, I think. Like it's a Seiko or Casio. No, there's a clock.
If you take the cover off your digital time-based pedal, then you can actually play that little number game on your Seiko Casio.
And Snake and stuff like that. No, there is something called clock in digital time-based pedals.
Sure.
They have to keep time. That's how you adjust them. So that clock actually will make noise if you're not careful, and it can be really annoying and hard to solve for. So I like to separate, if I can, my digital pedals from my analog pedals, and if I can separate further, I keep my time-based pedals. They're isolated with the chocks, but if you don't have an isolated supply, definitely keep the time-based digital pedals like if separate. Somehow power them separately, whatever you're doing. If you're using like a daisy chain power supply, use more than one. You don't want to combine a daisy chain and have all your pedals on the same daisy chain. That will cause problems.
Tick, tick, tick. Yeah, I know Strymon recommends that you not daisy chain any of their pedals, because they all have, like, I think the El Capistan is minimum 300 milliamps.
Yeah.
So that's on my board, that's plugged into its own 500 milliamp port.
Yeah. So I want to cover one more thing. And this is just like advice for if you're building a pedal board, and the reason you're listening to this episode and you're interested is maybe partly because you're like really obsessed with like, I want to get the right tones.
Okay, hit me.
The last piece of pro tip advice I'll give you is sometimes close enough is good enough.
Yeah. Dude, I literally just posted about that yesterday. There was a dude on one of the forums that I read, and he was obsessing over getting the song Misirlou correct, the Dick Dale surf extravaganza from the
Hmm.
movie Pulp Fiction.
Hmm.
And it was driving him crazy because it's a weird rhythm and the notes are blah, blah, blah. And basically what I said to him is, dude, keep working on it. Don't stop working on it. Try and get it as perfect as you can, but recognize that the people that are listening to it don't care. If you
And
are
don't know the
close,
difference.
if you are close enough, they are gonna be into it.
Yeah.
Like
I
as long as you're
understand.
playing it mostly right, most people are not going to notice. And what's more, if you put your heart into it and you're putting on a good show, they're not going to care. The guitar
Mhm.
players in the crowd are going to stand back, cross their arms, and say they could have done it better. But you're not playing for them
Well, they would do that anyway.
because exactly they would
Yeah.
do that anyway.
So I have to say that because, personal story time. I was in a cover band many years ago. They were
What?
known as yeah, we talked about them in a previous episode. They're a metal cover band and they
Right.
covered a wide variety of different types of metal. And of course, I, being the
Obsessive.
self-proclaimed obsessive compulsive perfectionist that I was making myself out to be, I was trying really hard to like nail every single, not the part. The parts were fine.
Yeah.
I got the parts. It was the tones
Right.
I was trying to get. Actually, you can back yourself into a dangerous corner with that,
Yeah, you
but
can.
because not every guitar tone mixes the same. So if you get your sound check with a really like mid-range
Yep.
focused sound, and then you switch to like a mid cut sound, you are now not going to sound as loud as you did. You're not going to cut as well. So
100% right.
trying to get like every single flavor of overdrive, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're going to make yourself crazy, and it won't matter. The only person it matters to is you.
You.
And I get it. I've been there. I'm one of you, and I understand it. Don't make my mistakes. I am telling you, it will not matter. Case in point, I did inadvertently have one too many drinks before a set. I
It happens.
I overestimated my ability to handle my brown. That's all I'm saying.
We're okay, man. It's all right.
Okay. All right.
No judgment.
People loved this band. They were buying me shots. They were buying me beers. I had an empty stomach. It was not smart. I went on stage. I felt I felt like a rock star. I went up there. I felt, I felt great. I played like ass. Okay.
Yeah, but you felt good.
I felt great, but we were recording we used to record the gigs digitally,
Yeah.
of course. So after the first couple of songs, people in the crowd were flipping out how great we sounded. People were like, after the set, like, dude, you're such a great player, man. I love how you play Man in the Box, man. And then later on, I listened to the set.
Oh, that's your mistake. Never
Hot
listen back.
garbage. I played so bad. I played terribly. I thought I was doing great in the moment.
Yeah.
Not great. Luckily, I settled down by the second and third set. The effect wore off and I was fine. And I, drove home safely. Everyone don't drink and drive.
Of course. After you had something to eat.
Yeah,
and
waited. I did do that. So point being, I learned from my horrible, horrible mistake.
Yeah.
No one cares. No one cares. Really, here they're listening to two things. I hate to break it to you: drums and vocals.
Yeah, pretty much.
Drums and vocals. The guitar player really is mostly there for show and filler until the solo. If so,
I guarantee you they're not paying attention to the guitar player till the singer stops singing.
Yeah. And look, dude, even for surf music, and I have, between you and me, Wes, I've been listening to a lot of surf music thanks to you lately.
You're welcome.
And I will tell you, I'm really impressed. Glad you got me into it. I love it. Probably not as obsessed as you are right now. However,
probably not.
However, it got me thinking about all sorts of crazy shit you and I could be doing. But I will leave it there. I'll leave it there. And just say, I cannot play surf guitar.
It's a specific skill, man. You got to get into it.
Not my thing. Right, like off the bat, I'm like, oh, I love these chord changes, and like I don't have that sensibility yet. Like if I do it more, I'll get there, maybe. But like what I love about it though is that as soon as I heard me doing it, even though I know the nuances aren't there, I heard it and I'm like, that's close enough. It's close enough that I can say it's close enough sometimes is good enough. Don't
Yep.
make yourself crazy. I'm enjoying myself, which is what all that really matters.
Great advice.
Yeah. You came up with a very interesting pick this week.
Yeah. And
Not one I expected, but hard to argue
thank you. I
this one.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of my
Because,
favorite albums of all time, by the way.
yeah. And it's not an album that you think of when you think of blazing guitar solos or anything like that. You know, I posit that most people would not have any idea what the lead guitar player's name even is.
No,
Right.
but
Because,
one of the most recognizable lead tones
yeah,
ever recorded.
absolutely. So the album that we're throwing down for the dessert segment in Music That Matters is the 1984 album from Mr. Canada himself, Bryan Adams. That's Bryan with a Y. And that album is called Reckless.
Yeah, man.
It was Bryan Adams' fourth studio album, which most people don't know, and it was his make or break. He had a good release with Cuts Like a Knife. The album right before this had one very well received song, Cuts Like a Knife, but basically Reckless was his do or die. If he didn't have a hit single on that album, he was going to get dropped.
Well, he
And
didn't have one.
no, he didn't have one. He had 6 top 50 hits. As a matter of fact, he had 6 top 15 hits,
Dude,
from this album. Run to You, Somebody, I Need Somebody, Heaven, of course, which is like the most, I mean, that
every
was,
prom song that year,
yeah.
and for many years after.
And that's the only one on this album that went to number 1. Run to You was number 6. Summer 69 was number 5. One Night Love Affair, which is a fantastic song. And of course, my favorite song on the entire album, Rest in Peace, Tina Turner. It's the duet he did with Tina Turner called It's Only Love. Bryan Adams wrote that song and got Tina Turner to sing it with him. And it is absolutely my favorite song on that album. One of my favorite songs of all time.
Wow.
So Bryan Adams has a songwriting partner called Jim Vallance, and they wrote all the songs on the album, and they've written most of Bryan Adams' other songs. Vallance is very well known in the industry. He's written songs for or with Heart, Bonnie Raitt, Aerosmith, Rod Stewart, Ozzy Osbourne, Kiss. You know, he's like the Desmond Child of this era. He played a little percussion on the album, but you know, he's not really, his contribution is writing the songs. Bryan Adams, of course, plays guitar. He also plays piano. And the lead guitar player that is all over this album and continues to play with Bryan Adams to this day is a man called Keith Scott. And he is, as far as I'm concerned, when I hear his tone, to me, that is 1980s AOR Strat tone. Bam, period, end of story. If I can sound like Keith Scott, I know I've nailed my Strat tone. That's where I go. He had a guy called Dave Taylor playing bass, and then over the course of the album, there's 3 different drummers. Interestingly enough, and here's a little trivia point for you, on the song Heaven, the drummer was none other than Journey's very own Steve Smith.
I never knew that.
Yeah. Tina Turner, of course, sang on It's Only Love, and they even got Lou Gramm from Foreigner singing backups on a song called She's Only Happy When She's Dancing. So we've got this album Reckless, 5 songs on each side, because I did have it as an LP, and I still have it as an LP, not the same one. I had to replace it. 5 songs on side A, 5 songs on side B, 10 songs total. And songs 1 through 8 are absolute bangers, right? Songs 9 and 10 are, in the context of this album, are a little weak.
The weaker of the whole album.
Yeah, but that's like saying, you know, the 2 rookie cornerbacks only got 17 tackles that year, and the 2 veteran cornerbacks got 20. You know, for a football analogy there for American football. There's no filler on this album whatsoever. It is stem to stern. It's probably one of the best albums that you can get. But from a songwriting aspect, it's a huge album. From a musical, Bryan Adams is not doing anything complicated. He's not doing, there's no weird time signatures. There's no strange keys. There's no, weird key changes. They're not breaking any ground tone wise. They're playing Strats and Tellys and Les Pauls and ES335s. It's filled with 80s drum sounds. So gated snare, keyboard pads, Hammond organ. There's nothing in the tone palette that stands out, but it's the sum of the parts, because Reckless is the sound of the radio in the mid 1980s.
But you know what? I know why you're saying what you're saying, but I would argue that some of those, when you hear the first chords of It's Only Love,
yeah,
that is to me a very standout guitar tone.
Yeah, I mean,
in its clean, compressed simplicity and well-produced simplicity.
Yeah.
It is unmistakable. The first few arpeggiated notes of Run to You.
Uh-huh.
Unmistakable.
Yeah.
Nothing, you said nothing complex or, complicated. Yet, I would argue that he still broke a little bit of ground here. Like, he used a capo, and it's like he's using arpeggiated, like, sliding thirds, and he's playing. Honestly, there's a B flat in It's Only Love. Like, how many? Like, I'm just being realistic here. Like, how it's not an open C G D, like a B flat. Like, I'm just saying, like, there's flavors on these songs that, even though they're not complex, stand out in the fact that they're simple, but yet they're unmistakable.
Yeah.
Right. And what did you say about when you hear Keith Scott's tone? Like, that's they re-record. This album was so popular, they re-recorded it recently.
Yeah.
Okay. If you listen to the re-recordings, they are remarkably similar.
Yeah.
Which proves a lot of things. One is that guitar playing, the tone is in the fingers. Despite the fact that decades have passed, it still sounds like that tone.
Yeah.
Unmistakable. And to me, this was the blueprint, like for what great guitar tone hits. Guitar tone was supposed to be. These songs were the blueprint of what a hit was supposed to be. Just in its simplicity, it was, to me, groundbreaking. And
yeah,
at the time, what was going on at the time in music?
Hair metal is what the big competition was,
on
but
one
that stuff
side
wasn't getting on the radio.
Right. And then on the other side, you had, like, Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, Michael Jackson, Madonna.
Right. So to me, this is like true singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
However, I would say not guitar focused, but guitar
centric.
Yeah, guitar present, right?
Yeah.
You heard their guitar makes up some of the great parts of these songs.
Yeah.
All the great riffs. Like, I don't know, man. I like that. There's something about this album that when I saw that on him, like, undeniably, this is a guitar album. It just isn't like a,
it's
guitar
not
album like
Steve Vai or Van Halen or
right.
Anything like that. Yeah. And to this day, when I plug in a Strat, a single Strat, I want it to sound like the beginning of It's Only Love.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's the tone I'm trying to get.
Although, didn't he use a Telecaster for that?
In the live version.
Didn't he use a Telecaster for that album, that Bryan Adams?
No.
You don't like Telecasters, do you?
Keith Scott plays a Strat, and let's move on.
This is Wes being tortured in a prison camp. Say Telecasters are good. No, I can't do it. Just do it.
It's Only Love is, you can, and that's one of the cool things about this album is that this album is a rhythm guitar player's dream.
It really is.
and when people who are learning to play the guitar say, what songs should I learn, especially if they're trying to figure out how to learn songs by ear, I steer them to this album because everything's in standard tuning and they're using a lot of really basic chords. You can play the intro and verses of It's Only Love with power chords: D, C, A, B flat, and F, and that little lick that goes between F and B flat. It's simple, it's powerful, it's hard to beat. And like I said, none of the songs are particularly complicated. Anybody can play these songs. It's this combination of voice and instruments and timing that made it the amazing album it is,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Can we take a minute actually to just say that as great as the album was instrumentally, Bryan Adams as a
Killer
vocalist,
voice.
and also the songwriting, like
Yeah.
so catchy, yeah. So instrumentally a great album. The songs are great. Bryan has a phenomenal voice, and to this day continues to have that voice, which I really admire. Like he maintained his voice, which is great.
Yeah, he hasn't. Yeah, we hear live videos of him in the last 10 years, and he's not tuned down 2 steps like certain metal bands that are currently on tour and never to end and in court. Yeah, but I mean, like his competition for having 6 top 15 singles are Michael Jackson's Thriller and Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, right? That's his competition. That's what we're talking about. Reckless, when it first came out, it climbed up to number 6 in the US. Then over time it kind of faded a little bit, and then they released Heaven and Summer of '69, and the album went right up to number 1. Since it came out in the last 40 years, Reckless has sold over 12 million copies worldwide.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And in Canada, of course, which is where Bryan Adams is from, it peaked at number 1 on their charts and was the first album by a Canadian musician to sell 1 million copies in Canada.
Okay. So
it's a huge album.
So
and it's so fun to listen to.
So it matters.
It does. It matters.
I mean, and you know, there was a lot of great music going on back then. Besides like the hair metal that we mentioned, like I think at the time, in addition to this album, I was listening to Journey, I was listening to Boston. It's like on the radio front. If we're talking like radio front, those were like 2 bands that were guitar centric, that were also great songwriters and great singers. Right? Yep. But you know, to me, Reckless is like, to me, Journey is all about Steve Perry and Neil Sean.
And that voice, yeah.
Right. And to me, Boston is about Brad and Tom. To me, Reckless is like, it's Bryan Adams. It's really a singer-songwriter type album. You're not hearing like egos going back. You're just hearing great songs. I don't know if he ever duplicated the success of this album. I mean, it was talk about like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, and you see that with a lot of artists. You know, there's a creative and performative peak that is so far above the rest of their output that there's no other way to describe it, I think, than expressing that genius finds a way out. And you take an album like Reckless, and I think it is an absolute genius album. So maybe Bryan Adams isn't a genius songwriter, right? Because like you said, he never reproduced this level of success and just awesomeness. But the level of creativity, inspiration, performance, talent, songwriting, skill, it all came together with all the personnel at exactly the right moment in time for them to put out something that really was greater than the sum of the parts.
Perfect storm.
You know, and that's what, when I came up with the idea for this segment, that's the albums that I was hoping that we would be able to feature, the ones that show a band or an artist at the absolute top of their power, you know. And you know, this album was a career maker. You know, people still go see Bryan Adams today
Hmm.
because they know they're going to hear 4 or 5 of these 6 hit singles that came off of this album.
Yeah.
And if he's smart, in my opinion, he plays them all. You know,
Give the people what
um,
they want.
yeah, give the people what they want.
Keep playing Tom Sawyer, Rush. You're not getting away from it.
Yeah, yeah. And I've heard him play "It's Only Love" with other singers,
Sure.
and it's still a really great song. It ain't Tina
Sure.
Turner great, babe,
No.
but you know, it's still really great when he plays it with pretty much anybody.
Yeah.
Um, he did one with a country singer, and I apologize for not being able to remember her name, but it was really good. It was like 85% Tina Turner level.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it was really good. And
So
yeah, so this is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I just love this album. And
that's cool, man.
I like listening to it on the LP, even though I do have it, you know, on my phone, and I can listen to it in the car. I really love throwing on the LP because emotionally it takes me right back to a time when I was a teenager and struggling, not just as a teenager, but as a guitar player. And it was really powerful to me to be able to sit down on the edge of my bed and play songs that I heard on the radio. That was a hugely inspirational moment for
Yeah.
me to be able to sit down. And of course, I didn't know about capos, so I struggled with Run to You,
Yeah.
right? Until I found out about capos. My guitar teacher said, just use a capo. I'm like, what's a capo?
What's a capo?
But learning how to play Summer of '69, I had to wait for it to come on the radio. I'd listen to the top 40 countdown because I knew it was going to be on there.
Mm-hmm.
Dun, 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 dun. And then I grab my guitar and I'd like, oh man, I'm not tuned. Oh no, you know. And then when It's Only Love came out, and like that one, I didn't have to learn any new chords to play It's Only Love.
Right.
All I
That's
had to do was
cool.
figure out the little riff, and it
It's
was
very validating to like I
yeah,
can play the top 10 song with
yeah,
the knowledge I have right now. I'm able to do that. It's like, so maybe I can do this.
yeah. And every time I very distinctly remember doing this. You know, my little Area Pro Super Strat that I had, and a slippery, it looked like a seatbelt guitar strap,
Mm-hmm.
and standing in my room with my radio cranked up, picturing. But as far as I was concerned, I was on stage and Tina Turner was standing next to me singing this song.
Mm.
You know, that's what it was like in my mind's eye. And in the live version that became really popular on MTV,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the crowd noise would swell, and I was there. You know, I was backing up Bryan Adams and Tina Turner, and it you know, people talk about, you know, the Beatles made me want to play guitar, this happened, that happened. Reckless made me want to be in a band.
Mm.
You know, it wasn't the song. Brian May of Queen is who made me want to play guitar,
Mm-hmm.
but Reckless made me want to be in a band because I could
Wow.
do that. I could play those songs. And if I could play them, then I could write them. And if I could write them, I could be in a band.
That's so cool. Now look at you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool,
And I
man.
did in one of my bands, we covered Run to You, and it was my pick. So we would alternate every gig, we would play a new cover.
Right.
Or every couple of gigs we would play a new cover, and we
Mm-hmm.
rotated who got to pick them in the band. And Run to You was the one I picked. And we did it. The singer was a woman, so it had a little bit of an edgy quality to it, right? Because I think about the lyrics of that song, and if a woman's singing them, it has a little different of an overtone.
Sure.
But she played acoustic guitar, so she used the capo and played the main riff, and then I just transposed the guitar part. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't use the capo, but I didn't need to because I didn't have to play the arpeggios. And out of all of the cover tunes we did in the 4 or 5 year run of that band, none of them got the reaction that Run to You got. You know, we started playing Run to You for the 4 or 5 gigs that we played that song, and all the people would come in from the bar.
Right.
and sing along,
Yeah, it's
you
one of
know?
those songs, man.
And there's that little harmonized, it's not really a guitar solo, but there's that little harmonized breakdown bridge.
Hmm.
And I swear to you, Andrew, it almost killed me. It was like the fulfillment of all of my rock and roll dreams. I'm playing this thing and I can hear the crowd singing the guitar melody back to me,
Right.
like no pressure, don't screw it up, Wes, but that's like one of the most rock and roll moments I ever had. And that was at TT Reynolds in downtown Fairfax City. It was a dumpy, crappy little club. And it's the most rock star thing that's ever happened to me. And I will
Oh man,
never forget that. And it's
what
all
a
thanks to Bryan Adams and the Reckless album.
what a great memory to have. That's so
Yeah.
cool. I love that. Man, great pick this week. Thank you so much. Uh-oh, getting emotional.
I'm a little verklempt.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that story. That means a lot to me. And that's why we do this, right?
That is exactly why we do this.
That's why we're doing this. I have, but between both of us, I'm sure we have more memories like that to share, and I'm sure we'll get to them. But for now, I think this was a phenomenal episode. I want to thank you for all of the great advice that you gave this week, and letting me give mine. And I want to
Yeah,
thank
I appreciate. I learned so much more about pedal boards. I thought I knew a lot about pedal boards, but I feel like I know way more now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to thank everyone who's listening, everyone who's subscribing. Thanks for sticking with us. I know we do long episodes, but we do them for you because we love you.
It's all out of love.